Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to another episode of Blueprint to Billions featuring attorney and strategist Terry Bruner. I'm your host, Evan Mack, and today's focus is on how TPA investments play into long-term wealth building and what your younger generations need to understand. Today is TPA investments and the path to generational wealth. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Hey, Evan, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Right off the bat, can you break down what a TPA investment is? I'm throwing a lot of letters at people, and there might be a novice on here that might be interested but not knowing what it is. Can you break it down for us, sir?
Let's go alphabet soup, right? Alphabet soup, 1, 2,
I
3.
loved alphabet soup when I was a kid, man. I loved it.
Yeah, look, I still secretly eat it from time to time. Probably don't need the sodium, yeah. So a TPA, it's shorthand for, or it's an acronym for transfer of physical assets. And what that means is basically a property that has some sort of HUD involvement on it, whether it's HUD insurance or whether it's a HUD mortgage, it is being sold. And so the asset is the actual building and the land that it sits on, and it's being transferred. So instead of just calling it a loan assumption that most people would call it, HUD has to come up with its own special vernacular, and it's TPA, transfer of physical assets. So usually when an investor is scouting around for multifamily deals, they are looking for projects that they can either tap into singularly or as a part of some sort of investment group. And these so-called TPAs, they are just like any other real estate investment. They are, they're used to leverage wealth through multiple units in an apartment building.
So when it comes to building generational wealth through real estate, what mindset shift needs to happen first, especially for first gen investors?
Well, frankly, we I guess in some ways I'm fortunate, and we as a law firm, very fortunate to work with investors and developers who've been doing some form of multifamily development and investment over a long stretch of time. But I'm always curious when we have folks who are new to the process,
Right.
and who are just new to investing. Kind of, how did you get in? What happened? What made you go this route? And the story usually kind of congeals around, I think, one central narrative, and not trying to be too gratuitous here, but the narrative really is usually around, we just started where we were. We whatever was available to us, that's where we started. Maybe it was a family house that was in the family, and we were able to purchase it, and then we parlayed that into two or three other houses, and then we sold them, and then we acquired a duplex, or then we got a fourplex, or then we bought some sort of 10 or 15 unit complex. And it's like levering up, right? But you can't lever up until you lever someplace initially. And the deals that our firm works on, I mean, they're complex. These are multi-million, 10, sometimes hundreds of $1 million deals. And I think for the average person, you say, well, gosh, that's not me. I can't, that's not my entry point. And sure enough, it's probably not. But what most people fail to understand is there are any number of real estate investment groups out there who may or may not be investing in HUD properties. Maybe they're investing in other multifamily properties, but they're actively soliciting partnership dollars, investment dollars. And so sometimes for as little as $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, you can get into these investments. They pay you quarterly. They pay you some sort of quarterly return. Once the property is sold again, then you're paid out on a certain schedule. Those are things that I think the average investor just, particularly if you're first generation and you don't come from this sort of world, you just wouldn't know that it exists. But I think before you get to any of that, it's really just about starting with what's available to you, and really just having kind of a dedicated pool of money that you can go and access some of these other multifamily kind of development processes, or just real estate in general.
What role does access to ownership through deals like HUD, multifamily play into like leveling the playing field for just building your wealth?
It's huge, right? I mean, I think we talked about, previously that for most particularly in America. Most Americans, your home is, probably the largest investment that most people make in their lifetime.
Right.
But even beyond, just your house, real estate historically has just been such a stable investment. And I had a law professor when I was in law school who used to always say, real estate will always be in vogue. And the reason is because they're not making any more dirt. so, so the idea is like you've got this commodity out there that's always going to be, that's always going to have some value attached to it. Sometimes there ebbs and flows, ups and downs, but there's always going to be value associated with it. The bigger reason I think is that people understand, at least in a very practical way in most people's brains, you understand real estate. It's something you can easily see. It's tangible. You can go
Right.
put your hands on it. You can walk through a door. You can see a building, and that's a little bit more approachable, I think, to most people as opposed to, for example, some more complicated investments that may be in the stock market or the bond markets or just anything that unless you have some familiarity with it, maybe you don't see it in the same way. So to the extent that real estate, and particularly one that's backed and leveraged by the federal government, can be accessed, it's just a huge differentiator in how you build wealth. And I know we've kind of glossed over this, but the main advantage for doing these sorts of deals is that it's essentially guaranteed money. Now it's not like the federal government is necessarily giving you a check, but they're saying we're going to give you a relatively good interest rate to either acquire or build, sometimes a, 200, 250, 300 unit apartment complex. And we're going to give you 30 or 35 years to pay this, to amortize this and to pay this off. And we're going to make it non-recourse, meaning that you have no personal liability if something goes wrong. The
Wow.
entity essentially does. And you can sell it at any point for a gain.
Wow.
That's a huge benefit to someone who's looking to lever up and acquire and amass more wealth. But obviously, usually, as is true with so many things, it's about the entry point. How do you get in?
Absolutely. So specifically for younger generations, college students, what's the drawback to waiting until later to start planning for retirement or real estate investment? Is later a bad thing?
Well, it's not a bad thing in the sense that you're waiting until you're more stable or you're waiting until you acquire a bit more to get in the market. But obviously, it's a bad thing in the sense that the biggest advantage you have when you're young is that you're young.
Yeah.
So it's the time value of money, and it's also compounding interest. So someone who starts acquiring properties in their 20s or investing in the stock market in their 20s, chances are they're going to be in a better situation than someone who waits until they're in their 50s to start
Mm,
doing that. Usually on a scale of human life, what do they call those tables? Actuarial tables. On an actuarial table, the likelihood is that when you're in your 20s, you're going to outlive someone who's in their 50s. So your
touche.
money just has more time to work for you, and it has more time to compound in several and multiple ways. So I think that the answer there is, look, you may not be able to go buy a 200 unit, apartment complex when you're 23 or when you're 27. But for most people, they have, some sort of, maybe not, maybe I shouldn't just paint with such a broad stroke, but for many people, there are avenues that you have to leverage some kind of resource to be able to do some sort of investment. Even
Mm,
if that means that you get with, your buddies that you went to high school with, or, your classmates or your teammates in college or whatever, and you guys go out and buy, a piece of land for $100,000, and each one of you have some fractional ownership interest in that. I think it largely starts with just the mindset of what it takes to build wealth and what it actually means to acquire things and to accumulate things over time, and not just simply wanting to get the big burst or the big shot. And I think it's an evolution for most of us. When I was in my 20s, I thought, well, one day I'm just going to strike it rich and I'm going to hit it big, and then I'm going to go buy like this big thing.
right.
And I think what I've recognized, through the years is really the biggest gains that I've had. I won't say they've been incremental, but they've been accumulatory, if that's a word. They've accumulated over time, and as those things continue to accumulate, you actually look up one day and you say, "Well, wow, we've got some resources here." And I think real estate's very similar to that.
Where else can you find an investment that's a bigger ROI than a TPA investment?
Well, I mean, obviously the stock market,
Yeah.
historically performs well, and so I would never say that this needs to be the only avenue that you have,
It
for
fluctuates
investment.
though, you know what I mean? Like it's
It
not
does.
it's volatile sometimes too.
It is, but the reason I like TPAs and multifamily, investments in particular, you are hard pressed. Not saying that it doesn't exist, but you're hard pressed to find, particularly if you're in, let's say, the top 20, urban markets or metropolitan areas in the United States. You're hard pressed to find a building that was built in 1985 that, if it has been maintained well, it's, the neighborhood has not changed too dramatically. 25 years later, that's still going to be an income producing property. So imagine if you bought something, if you bought something 20 years ago to this day, you're probably still maintaining and making fairly, stable set of income, assuming you keep the things leased up and you're keeping up with the maintenance. I mean, you're hard pressed to find something that's going to generate that kind of return on investment over that period of time.
What makes TPA work such a powerful vehicle for creating or leveraging greater wealth?
I think it's the power of multiplication. What I tell clients all the time is you only need to do one, and then the sky is the limit. So the hardest deal that you'll probably ever do with the federal government is the first one. Now we have a couple of clients now who are, they've done multiple deals, and I'm not going to say how many deals, but they've done, a significant number of deals over the years. And it's not that we just rinse and repeat, what we're supplying the government. It's just that they're so much more efficient at providing us the things that we need in order to package things for the government, or to the government. And so when you look at clients, like those, they are literally going to have, asset accretive streams over multiple years. And when they get ready to sell, they will sell, most likely in most markets, they will sell these for a fairly significant set of profits. The power in the TPA and in using the federal government to acquire and to develop these things is, obviously, the benefits that I talked about earlier in terms of, interest rates and the amount of time, and no personal liability and such. But the real advantage is that you're able to leverage these as income producing properties, one on top
Yeah.
of another, and then you're able to kind of stack them, and you're able to scaffold, and you're able to do that in a fairly rapid ascent that you may or may not be able to do if you were buying, for example, just houses, like single family houses.
Mm.
That's powerful. And the fact that you've got the essentially the full faith and credit of the United States government standing behind those deals, I mean, you're never going to completely eliminate risk from transactions, but this is about as risk as risk averse as you possibly can be. Let's put it that way.
So what common misconceptions do people have about HUD roles in private investment?
I think most people believe that if you do a HUD deal, there can't be any private investment in
Right.
that deal. That if you are, let's say, for example, if you're acquiring an apartment complex that, maybe has 225 units in it, and it has a HUD insured note, a mortgage on it, most people assume, well, that just means you're dealing with the government. You have a contract with the government. That's that. You don't have any other. There's no other room in that. That's wildly untrue. We see a fair number of our transactions and a fair number of our clients actually bringing in private money, and I'm not going to say private equity, but what I mean is like external money
Hmm.
to make out the equity side of this. And obviously, they're gonna make payouts, and they're gonna make distributions, and they're gonna make, withdrawals and such to their investors, as would be true in any investment. I think that's one of the big ones I see, is that, if you do a government deal, there is no other external investment in it. And I think the other big misconception, which we talked about earlier, is that if you are doing business with the government in the way of multifamily, that it usually has some sort of income restriction, that it's subsidized, or that there is, there's kind of a lower target or a lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum that's being served. And so people are oftentimes shocked when I point out, even here in Houston, but certainly in other cities, because we fortunately have a nationwide practice. But when we go to other cities and you point out, hey, that building was built with HUD money. They're like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
It's like, and these are Class A properties that may be in the central business district. It's all
Wow.
about whether or not whether or not it just leverages and it does well enough to support itself. But HUD underwrites those deals. It's there.
What early steps should first-time TPA investors or sponsors take to ensure long-term success?
You said what early steps should they take?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one, understand what you're getting into. So
Okay.
do your homework. That's the first thing. Second, like set up yourself in a way structurally and legally that you can actually maximize on these things. So if you're a long-term investor, for example, usually there's a sponsor entity in these things that that's where the money resides, so to speak. And then beyond that, they create other entities as they acquire each and every other property. Like you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up well for that. um, the thing that oftentimes gets overlooked, usually if you're buying a property, most of us don't have the expertise to manage a property. Like,
Right.
can you imagine, like, you build something and or you acquire something, it's got 200 units in it. Terry is not going to go manage that. I doubt Evan's going to go and manage
No,
that.
he's not.
So really having a relationship with a professional property manager who understands things like how do you collect the rent? How do you make sure maintenance is done? How do you make sure that, tenant security deposits are being maintained
Mm,
properly? So like really having, professionals and third parties on your team who can assist you through these through these types of things. One of the biggest mistakes people can make is assuming I'm going to do everything by myself and I'm going to keep all the money. First of all, that's like business 101 no no. But secondly, it's probably one of the easiest ways you get yourself into trouble. So, like having, for example, a good CPA, a good auditor who can audit your books, because in these types of deals, usually you're going to have to supply audited financials every year, and sometimes you've got to supply them every quarter. So making sure that you got someone who does your books and just really understanding what the structure of ownership and management looks like, and doing it in a way that you don't run afoul of some sort of rule or regulation. No one wants to be on the bad list when you're dealing with the federal government.
mm. So how can mentorship or even partnerships accelerate access to, HUD-based wealth building?
Oh, it's critical. The adage around you can't be what you can't see. It's
Mm,
so true, and particularly for first generation investors, most people just don't have any sort of familiarity with these programs. Many people don't even know that they exist. So, I've been saying for years that there's a group. I think the CCIM, which is a real estate designation, groups like theirs, and other groups like the Urban Land Institute, and just general investment clubs. We probably need, as a HUD community and as a multifamily community, really start introducing more concepts of mentorship and more like tangible vehicles, particularly for younger people, first generation folks, to get in on investment opportunities such that they exist. But frankly, part of the reason why I know this world exists is because I was fortunate to do an internship at HUD one summer in law school, which completely reoriented the trajectory of my career, my legal career, and ultimately my professional life generally. So you've got to have an entry point, and I think the more pathways that we can build for those entry points is critical. I mean, one of the things we do in our firm, for example, is we hire law clerks who probably don't know the first thing about this area of law, and the reason we do that is because we're trying to contribute to training the next generation of folks who know about this, and ultimately they may either work in the area or they may become investors themselves. But having an introduction is so critical to the way in which this happens, and that I think goes right to the question of mentorship.
mm. But what role does legacy play in your own work, and how do you hope these deals shape the future?
Well, legacy is always a term that no one wants to think about until you start getting older. And
Mm,
so I started thinking about legacy, differently, or started thinking about legacy differently when I became a father. And so, obviously you start thinking about, those who come after you. Uh,
right.
you want them to have a different lens, and you want them to have a different set of advantages and opportunities than may have been true for me. So in terms of the work that we do at TBLO, we really are trying to not only just build the next, facilitate the next generation of lawyers who do this work, but we really are trying to, in our very small way, influence and build community and do it in a way that I think gets to the heart of what it is to be in this American experiment. And I know that may sound like high minded or whatnot, but the reason why I love doing this work is because housing, there's nothing more fundamental and foundational in our world than where you live. And this gives us an opportunity to really influence the way in which our communities are shaped, how they look, and the way in which people interact with those communities, which is very important to the work that we do. That's really how I think about legacy.
So anyone listening or anyone watching who's on the fence about jumping in, what's your call to action, sir?
I say the same way when you're at the pool and you're on the diving board and you're looking down and you're like, should I do it? You rarely do you regret jumping. Most of the time, you regret not jumping because it's hot and you're like, man, that would have cooled me off.
Yeah.
So, I'm being facetious in saying that, but there's no time like the present. Look around, find deals, get on calls, talk to people, do your homework, do research. There, I promise you, there's a deal lurking out in your community or somewhere around the country that you can be a part of. And there's no time like the present to be a part of it. In fact, because the economy is, kind of going through its own, pivot right now, this may be one of the best times that folks have to get in, or at least to explore this environment. If you've got, a little bit of extra cash sitting around, or even if you're thinking about getting some extra cash sitting around, I just think that this is a terrific opportunity for people to explore kind of an off the beaten path way of growing wealth and building wealth, and doing it in a way I think that makes complete sense to me.
And I know it's your career path and I know it's what you do, but why do you do what you do, sir?
Well, I do it in part because one, I want to serve something that's bigger than me. So, obviously serving our clients and, serving this kind of multi-pronged mission of helping the country, get to, or increase or get to better housing stock. That's really important to me. I think the bigger piece for me in terms of why this matters is because I want to be able to say one day, hey, I built this thing, just in terms of the firm, but I also built this practice area that, very few people knew about. And we did it in a way that was unique, it was authentic, and we helped a lot of people along the way make some money doing it.
Awesome.
I think that's a pretty neat thing to say.
I agree. Thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for watching. Thank you for joining Blueprint to Billions. For more on HUD deals, legacy building, and legal guidance, visit terrybrunerlaw.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review for this episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.